I got to play the new Lords of the Fallen game back in July, and wow. They let me play for around 2.5 hours, and I finished everything aside from the last boss they let me fight just because I didn't have time. It was pretty awesome. But this game was not what I was expecting, and this video isn't sponsored either, but thank you so much to everyone over at CI Games for the opportunity to let me come play it early. So let me start this off by giving my basic thoughts before diving into the parts that I actually got to play. This game was miles ahead of the first Lords of the Fallen. It feels like they almost took the criticism of the first game as a challenge to come back and blow everyone's minds with this one. Every single feature they added is great, nothing felt unnecessary or too difficult to learn. The movement isn't as fluid as something like Elden Ring, but it was still smooth enough for me not to really think about it too much. They also did a great job countering this issue with the rolls. Your character covers so much ground when rolling, which I was worried might make the game too easy, but the enemies have some crazy range as well. They also have quick stepping when you're locked on, which is nice. During boss battles, it helps to use rolls as an escape and quick steps for actual combat. The thing that made me fall in love with this game though was the parrying. I think I was able to parry every boss I fought besides one, and it made the gameplay so much more rewarding. It isn't as hard to parry as it is in some of the other Souls-likes, but this one shows you a little posture bar that fills up the more parries you get, which is usually around 4. For bosses, that is. For enemies, it's usually just 1. The ranged attacks are another cool addition that I didn't really ever think I'd use, but once I figured out how they worked, I started to see the value. Basically, depending on your class, you have a certain amount of arrows, rocks, or whatever you find as ranged attacks. You get a lot of these, and usually I like to save up on items like this, but they actually refill slowly, which I think was a great way to encourage people to use them more. It mostly just helped with taking out mobs, but they came in clutch when bosses would run away or fly up in the air. There's a ton packed in this game, like weapon buffs that are actually really strong. There's flower beds where you can make your own checkpoints, and the umbral realm where you can find hidden paths and secrets. The puzzles in umbral were really cool. Basically how it works is there are 2 different realms, the living realm called Axiom that you'll play normally throughout the game, and umbral, which is the realm of the dead. Umbral is way more difficult, but is necessary to find things such as ladders, doors, and other paths. You can get a peek into umbral by holding up your lantern to see what's around you, or you can send yourself there and find something that lets you return later. You also go into umbral when you die as a last chance, but since the game is much harder in umbral, you better be prepared. So my gameplay was a lot of what got shown in the extended gameplay trailer a couple weeks ago, with a couple different areas and bosses. I picked a dex class, I know, because I saw everyone was rocking strength, and while it was pretty powerful, this seemed like a game that was much more centered around strength builds. I had 2 small swords or daggers in each hand, but I will say I appreciate that they still let you parry even without a shield, because I would have struggled so much more if it weren't for that. The beginning was a pretty normal tutorial, but what caught me off guard was the fact that umbral was needed for a lot of things. This is actually a super fun mechanic that could have easily been very annoying, so props to the devs for making sure this was solid. I think all the water in the game has an area underneath it once you go into umbral. The way they did it was really smart though. Basically anything that you need umbral for will kill you and send you to umbral anyway. For example, there was a part where I couldn't figure out where to go, so I decided to just run through the water and see if it killed me. I was confused for a second when it did actually kill me, only to realize I revived myself in umbral and the water was gone with an entire hidden path underneath it. I think this is a really cool way to show the player what to do when you get stuck while still making you feel like you discovered it yourself. But my advice for this game is if you don't know what to do, either hold your lamp over everything or go into umbral and then explore. There were a ton of things I kept missing until I died and realized they were right there in umbral. They also have items that return you to normal form after you complete the required umbral part, so it's not like you have to waste one of your lives all the time. And they put moths around most key items for this, so always keep an eye out for that. The first boss was absolutely badass, and I don't want to spoil this one for a specific reason, but there's a dragon, there's fire, there's an awesome 1v1, it's great. The next area is where the graphics really shine for me. There were a lot of moments where I was really shocked at how good everything looked, but man, these areas are not easy. This game was a bit easier than a typical Souls game for me, but I definitely wasn't just breezing through it. But the next boss, Pieta, is where I really got into this game. This boss honestly had no flaws to me. The rhythm was incredible and parrying in this fight was so satisfying. In the second phase, she spawns clones, which seem overwhelming at first, but I kind of just moved out of the way and they weren't really a huge issue. I think this one took me 2 or 3 tries to beat. I honestly thought it was going to take way longer, but it was hilarious seeing the devs behind me watching me fight her. Surprisingly though, this game didn't take me too long to get the hang of. And after this boss is when I realized they had really stepped it up for this game and put so much attention and and care into it. Anyway, the next area drove me kinda nuts, but was pretty enjoyable still. This is where they started going heavy on the hidden areas and use of umbral to find new paths. It kinda reminded me of Blighttown a little bit, but not in a bad way. There were a few things I missed even in umbral, but I think once you get used to the ways of finding different things in the world, it's not that big of a deal. This area also had one of the hardest mini bosses I've seen. She was parryable, but so fast it was insanely tough. I realized I had a poison buff for my weapon though and tried it out. Oh my, they made the consumables insanely powerful in this game. I think they focused on making these a bit more rare but much more powerful, which I actually appreciate because most of the time I don't even bother using them in other games since they don't always make a huge difference. The poison was insane though, and I was able to take her down in just a couple of tries. These are also my favorite kinds of fights, just the humanoid 1v1s. This was exactly what I wanted. The first phase was a pretty straight up duel that I had no trouble parrying, and then in the second phase she just went insane with attack combos. I honestly think I just got lucky. Oh, and they also have healing consumables around the world, but they weren't like the life gems in Dark Souls 2. They seemed pretty rare, like you wouldn't have more than just a few in your inventory at a time. But after this, I did run into a merchant that sold them as well as weapons, but they were all strength weapons, which is what made me think that maybe that was more the intended build for this game. I also found a blacksmith in the middle somewhere. You can get a key to unlock her after defeating a mini boss, but after I didn't see her again. I think they said she goes to your hub after you unlock her, but I honestly forgot to go back to the hub after I reached it the first time. It was a little bit confusing, but it had a ton of NPCs and things to find, so I'm excited to explore that more when the game comes out. And speaking of the weapon upgrades, I believe you can go up to plus 10. I obviously didn't get a chance to upgrade my weapons, but apparently each upgrade gives you a pretty significant jump. And before I forget, leveling up was pretty standard as well, so nothing crazy to report on there. The last boss I faced caught me by surprise. It was a huge monster in a pit that gave me a good introduction to how the big beast bosses were going to be in this game. This guy was by far the hardest boss I faced, probably because I couldn't parry him, but he also had a little umbral element that you have to get rid of every once in a while or you get poisoned. It was kind of confusing, but not quite as overwhelming as it sounds. I think I tried this guy 8 times before our session time was up, but I was probably a couple tries away from taking him down. I was genuinely sad I had to stop playing. This game was awesome and I was itching for more all day, and honestly just talking about it again now makes me want to play it again. I played a lot of Souls-likes, and honestly so far I think this is my favorite one. Oh, and they also have PvP and 2-player seamless co-op, which is not a priority to me but is always appreciated. I absolutely cannot wait for the full game to come out on October 13th. I think everyone's going to be impressed when they play this, and if the first few areas are any indication of how this game is going to turn out, I'm more than hyped for it. And since I didn't do an outro last time, this time I thought I'd